Imagine stepping into the fog-shrouded depths of a Louisiana bayou, where twin sisters' forbidden pact with a bondsman unleashes a haunting saga of betrayal, blood, and buried sins. Dare you listen to the whispers that could consume your soul? In the shadowed hush of Willow Parish, Louisiana, where the bayou whispers secrets to the moss-draped oaks, the courthouse crumbled to ashes on March 14, 1849. What the lawmen called a sorrowful mishap from a toppled lantern. Yet, amid the charred bones of that forsaken hall, searchers unearthed a truth that mocked their pious claims. 3 skeletons in the cellar, shackled to rusted hoops, sunk deep in the damp stone, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow their cries. The parish scribe's ledgers from 1847 to 1849 vanished in the flames. Land titles, wedding bonds, and, most grievous of all, the inheritance papers for the Hawthorne holdings. For generations, the kin of Willow Parish have murmured low, like wind through cracked tombs, of what truly befell at Whispering Bayou Plantation in those shadowed years, of the twin daughters of Colonel Ezekiel Hawthorne, and of the bondsman named Elijah, who etched it all before fading into the mist like a ghost fleeing dawn. What follows is woven from the fragile threads of lingering missives, healers' notes from Baton Rouge, and affidavits sworn to a Yankee abolition ring, sealed away until 1963, as if the truth itself were too heavy for the light. Before we delve into the lament of the Hawthorne sisters and the sins that devoured a whole forsaken flock, ensure you're bound to this forgotten liturgy. Tap that warning chime. We unearth the gloomiest hollows of American lore that school books dare not graze. And drop a word sharing what realm or hamlet you're heeding from. We cherish knowing where our kindred unearth these forsaken woes. The revelation of Whispering Bayou stirs not with the blaze, but with a burial 2 years prior, and with 2 souls schooled that endurance demanded utter dominion in a world where the rain weeps eternal over crumbling verandas. Willow Parish in 1847 sprawled over the blackest sugarcane earth in Louisiana, loam that forged fortunes and etched the wilds into realms of sagging column ringed by canes stretching to the fading light, where the air hung heavy with the scent of decay. The parish hub of Mossville crouched at its heart, a huddle of moss-veiled bricks and mud paths, where growers bartered and their women feigned ignorance of whence the kin wealth truly flowed, from the sweat and sorrow of souls chained to the soil. Whispering Bayou Plantation sprawled 8 miles south of the hamlet, reached solely by a winding lane through vales of Spanish moss and over twin arms of the Mississippi River, where the water murmured like forgotten prayers. Colonel Ezekiel Hawthorne had raised the great house in 1828, a 3-level edifice with 12 chambers and a detached cookhouse linked by a latticed path, trembling in the candlelight that flickered like uneasy spirits. The bondsmen's huts, 24 shacks in 2 stark lines, hunkered a quarter-mile beyond the great house, near enough for swift calls, distant enough that the colonel escaped the echoes of the souls he claimed, their hymns fading into distant thunder. The colonel amassed his wealth in cane fame, but his notoriety sprang from darker roots. He'd fought in the Seminole strife under Andrew Jackson and returned bearing a creed that folk could be refined through deliberate mating, akin to honing beasts, in a land where the graves whispered of such unholy sciences. His shelves bore healer's tome from Philadelphia, farm annals from Virginia, and letters with scholars at academies who echoed his doctrines on blood ranks and faded flesh. Meticulous notes, gauges, insights, lineages traced back 3 bloodlines, as if mapping the veins of the damned. His neighbors deemed him queer, yet keen, in their drawing rooms lit by flickering tallow. His bondsmen named him otherwise, though never in pale hearing, their words swallowed by the bayou's eternal sigh. The colonel shunned wedlock. Rather, he'd acquired a bondswoman named Delilah in 1824 from a Natchez dealer, marked in the deed as of rare pale hue and mild demeanor, her eyes holding the sorrow of stolen horizon. Delilah bore twin daughters in 1825, Eliza and Miriam. The colonel reared them in the great house, schooled them with mentors from Baton Rouge, clad them in silks fetched from New Orleans. Yet he never loosed them, never claimed them as blood in any writ. On parchment, they stayed his chattel, pact granting him total sway over their every breath, like shadows bound to a fading light. Eliza and Miriam bloomed in eerie seclusion. They mastered script and verse, daubed in washes, plucked the harpsichord, their notes lingering like rain on graves. They pored over tales and figures, maps and French, but they seldom strayed from the grounds. The colonel vetted every collar and hour, sifting each bond through his iron creed. In the silence where thunder gathered, he preached they were chosen, graced with edges that lifted them past their lot, but that the world past whispering by you would never grasp or harbor them, a warning that echoed like distant hymns. He instilled that refuge lay in solitude, that faith was frailty, and that might, though bounded, was the sole coin of worth. In a house where candlelight trembled on warped wood, the twins drank these sermons deep. They forged their own tongue of gazes and sign, ending each other's words at times, mute for days and trading only slips across the supper board, their silence heavy as unspoken curses. They donned matching gowns in echoing shades, Eliza in shadowed emerald, Miriam in twilight indigo, colors that blended with the bayou's gloom. They devoured the same volumes in tandem, one from fore, one from aft, converging at core. They divided all, combs, baubles, whispers, and soon something bleaker, like the rot beneath plantation soil. Their mother, Delilah, passed in 1839, deemed by fever, though the huts hissed of marks on her limbs and dread in her gaze in her waning days, as if fear itself had carved her end. After her going, the colonel's grip cinched like a snare. He fitted bolts on their chamber doors that could only unlatch from without, locking in the echoes of her absence. He demanded weekly penned accounts of their deeds, their musings, their visions, trials, strewing treasures in plain sight to test theft, presenting male guests to gauge their stirrings, crafting plights to unmask any veiled defiance. In the weary light of dawn, the plantation flourished through these seasons. By 1847, the colonel held 63 bound souls, whose toil yielded 142 bales of cane yearly, traded through agents in Baton Rouge, gains sown in more soil, more souls, more volumes for his swelling shelves.
halls, where the air smelled of ink and regret. The bound folk at Whispering Bayou bore an odd tally, undue pale shades, more young than births warranted, and a grim rhythm of kin split and bartered, as youth sneered blooming, like leaves falling to forgotten graves. The taskmaster, a soul named Obadiah Fitch, had toiled at Whispering Bayou for 15 years. He dwelt in a shack by the huts, and fulfilled the colonel's bids with clockwork chill, his own scrolls, lash logs, labor rosters, meal curbs for bondsmen tagged for the mating scheme. These pages in Fitch's pinched script chronicled horrors with the bland air of crop tallies, which women driven to which shacks, which babes begot by which sires, which swellings ended, and by what means, in the silence where thunder built. In the great house, Eliza and Miriam grasped more than their sire knew. They scanned his tomes when he journeyed to Baton Rouge on trade, pressed ears to panels, and gleaned shards of talk between Fitch and the colonel. They knew what transpired in the huts after dusk, knew which bondsmen were their half-kin, knew their sire saw folk as trial subjects in his private forge of blood creed, and they brewed hate for him with a chill, enduring wrath that would have chilled him if he'd spied it, like rain whispering over unmarked graves. The dawn of February 3rd, 1847, broke with untimely warmth, the air reaching low 60s ere midday, heavy with the scent of impending storm. Colonel Hawthorne had passed the prior eve in his sanctum, laboring by wick glow on parchments to a sage at the medical school of South Carolina. The housefolk marked not amiss when he missed morning meal. He oft toiled through night and rose late. It was Fitch who unearthed him at 10, slumped in his hide throne with parchments strewn across his board. The colonel's visage bore an ashen cast, and when Fitch grazed his hand to rouse him, the flesh felt chill and slick like death's own touch.
Dr. Eliza Blackwood rode from Mossville 2 hours on, and deemed Colonel Ezekiel Hawthorne gone, reckoning the hour of passing betwixt midnight and daybreak. Grave spasm, he proclaimed, scarce eyeing the form. Man was 56, drove himself to dust. I'd cautioned him on his fiery humor and overtaxed mind. The heart yield, plain as that. But sundry marks clashed with this neat verdict. The colonel's supper platter, fetched to the sanctum at 8 the eve before, rested on a side stand with victuals scarce gray. A mug of cough, long grown cold, held a queer dregs at base, a fine grit that shimmered faint in the wick light, like poison's subtle gleam. The colonel's last missive to his council in Baton Rouge lay unfinished mid-phrase. I have wrought certain pacts touching the fate of my daughters, which must be wrought precisely as decreed, for their own safeguard, and for the safeguarding of my life's toil. Should any soul seek to— The line ceased there, the quill dragging off the leaf as if his grip had abruptly failed, trailing into silence. Eliza and Miriam stood as one in the passage beyond their sanctum, clad in twin sable dawn gowns that they'd somehow gained despite no foreknowledge of his end. Their countenances showed no weeping, no trace of dismay or woe. They clasped hands, digits woven, and beheld the rites with matching masks of vigilant repose, as if the bayou itself held its breath. We ought to probe him deeper, offered Mr. Thaddeus Whitaker, a bordering grower who'd come to offer reverence. Ezekiel was hale last month when I met him at the courthouse. This feels abrupt. The colonel drove himself to the tomb, Dr. Blackwood barked, vexed at his sage judgment challenge. I've witnessed it 100-fold. The flesh just yields. Now, if you'll pardon me, I must confer with the daughters on burial rites. But Dr. Blackwood never held that parley. Eliza spoke first, her tone finely tuned and chill as winter drizzle. Dr. Blackwood, we honor your swift heed. The rites will unfold 3 days hence with entombment in the kin plot. Mr. Solomon Hargrove, our size counsel from Baton Rouge, has been hailed and should reach by morrow eve. Until the testament is proclaimed and the holding settled, Eliza and Miriam will steer the plantation matters. Fitch will persist as taskmaster under our keen watch. The men in the chamber traded looks. Women steered no plantations, surely, not unwed women scarce 22, and there lurked something more, something they couldn't voice, a whisper that Eliza and Miriam had awaited this breath, that they drilled these utterances and knew precisely how fates would weave in the sorrowful hush. Now, Miss Eliza, Mr. Whitaker commenced in the belittling drawl men held for women musing on realms beyond their ken. You can't truly reckon to. Our sire schooled us precisely for this doom, Miriam cut in, her tone a reflection of her sister's. We grasp field cycles, trade tides, the handling of toil hands. We've poured his ways for years. This plantation will hold its yield as ever. What the men knew not, could not, was that Eliza and Miriam had girded for this dawn for moons. They'd scanned their sire's tally books, itched the names and strengths of every bound soul on the soil, learned which traders in Mossville could be bent and which shunned. They'd schemed for every twist, save one, the precise guts of their sire's testament.
The burial rite unfolded on February 6th under leaden heavens that vowed rain yet withheld. 43 neighbors and trade kin gathered, crowding in the salon where the colonel's husk lay in a pecan coffin draped in pale satin, the air thick with the scent of wilted blooms. The Reverend Josiah Caldwell from Mossville's Presbyterian fold gave a lament that lauded the colonel's gifts to Louisiana's harvest wealth and his zeal for pushing sage wisdom. Not one bound soul from Whispering Bayou graced the rite, though they huddled in the huts that eve for their own wake, a blend of gospel chants and ancient ways, voicing hymns that hailed release and the reckoning of debts. They hushed their tones, yet the murmur drifted over the fields to where Eliza and Miriam perched on the great house porch, like echoes from graves. They reckon they're loose now, Eliza murmured soft. They'll grasp otherwise, Miriam echoed in the fading light. Solomon Hargrove reached from Baton Rouge the eve after the burial, a stout man of 50 with hoary locks and the wary gait of one versed in bearing ill tidings to folk who could sour his days. He bore a hide pouch holding Colonel Hawthorne's testament and sundry sealed writs marked for the twins alone. The proclamation took place in the colonel's sanctum, now scoured of any whisper of his final breaths. Eliza and Miriam sat as one on a chaise, their sable dawn gowns whispering faint as they shifted. Fitch loomed by the portal, unbidden yet born, his etched visage blank. Hargrove undid his pouch and drew a thick sheaf tied with ebony cord. Colonel Hawthorne amended his testament on December 12th, 1846, scarce 2 moons ere his end. The clauses are uncommon. The writs opening verses were commonplace alms to the Presbyterian fold, trinkets parceled to sundry acquaintances. Then Hargrove hit the passage on the plantation and its dwellers. To my daughters Eliza and Miriam Hawthorne, I bequeath the whole of Whispering Bayou plantation, embracing all soils, edifices, beasts, tools, and human chattel, to be clasped jointly and evenly betwixt them. Yet this gift is bound upon the ensuing decrees, which must be met within 24 moons of my passing. Hargrove halted, cleared his gullet uneasily, and pressed on. First, both daughters must forge lawful Christian unions with men of fitting virtue and rank, blessed by the steward of this estate. Both unions must yield rightful progeny progeny within the decreed span. Third, the daughters must uphold the plantation at present yields and prove wise stewardship of its wealth. Eliza's grip clenched on Miriam's, their joints blanching. Should these bonds go unmet, Hargrove intoned, his tone sinking deeper, whispering Bayou plantation and all its holdings shall be vended at open call, with yields parceled evenly among the ensuing almshouses. The roll embraced harvest schools, healers' guilds, and bodies vowed to the push of sage grasp on human flocks, the colonel's last bid to outlast his creed. There's further, Hargrove said, drawing a second writ, a sealed word to you both. He passed the wax-bound fold to Eliza, who split the seal with her nail. Within, their sire's script spanned 3 leaves of thick cotton rag. Miriam leaned near, and they scanned as one in hush. The missive laid his reasoning with icy sharpness. He'd marked their unholy bond to each other, their spurn of proper womanly pursuits in wooing and wedlock. He deemed they would never willingly part, never bind fitting pacts with men who could sustain his toil and rightly steer his holdings. So he'd wrought a plight where they lacked choice, wed and breed, or forfeit all.
But the missive's closing verse held something grimmer. I have wrought pacts to assure you pick wisely. My web of letters spans the realm and path. They will walk, relay your deeds and pick. Recall ever that you are my making, and you cannot flee the core truth of your essence, no matter how you might feign elsewhere. The blood in your veins is both your boon and your cell. Eliza creased the missive neat and set it back in the fold. When she gazed up at Hargrove, her mask betrayed not. We grasp the bonds. Who stands as steward? I do, with Mr. Whitaker as co-steward. We're tasked to bless any union bids and assure the bonds are met. 24 moons, Miriam said. That yields us until February 1849. True. I must note, ladies, your sire's clauses are deeply queer. Most councils would have warned against. Our sire's mind was wholly his, Eliza cut in. We'll heed his will. Now, if you'll pardon us, we have plantation toil to mind. After Hargrove departed, vowing return in 6 moons to gauge their stride, the twins lingered in the sanctum. They sat in their sire's throne, Miriam on the cushion, Eliza on the arm, and gazed at the walls clad in tomes and healers' writs, at the tall tallies etching 2 score years of human trials, veiled as harvest steering. We can't unearth fitting mates in 24 moons, Miriam said at last. He knew that. He forged this to break, not if we command every thread, Eliza replied. Sire taught us that much. He held folk could be mated like beasts, that every facet of birthing could be steered and aimed. We'll prove him true, just not as he dreamed. What do you whisper? Eliza rose and strode to their sire's board, tugging open the low drawer where he'd hid his deepest scrolls. She drew a hide-bound tome and turned it to a leaf flagged with silk. Sire's mating logs. He etched all, which pairings bore which fruits, which strains he deemed exalted, which souls he marked for his scheme. Miriam joined her, scanning over her shoulder. The marks were healer cold, stripping folk to bare stock. Acquired male, roughly 25 from Beaumont holdings. Sound bite, sturdy spine, swift at chores. Scars on hide mark prior claim in Georgia. Meted with female 4. Fruits, 1 male babe vended 1837, 1 female babe held for later mating. He was a fiend, Miriam breathed. He was, Eliza concurred, but he was also precise.
And somewhere in these scrolls lies the balm to our woe. Over the ensuing weeks, Eliza and Miriam drowned in their sire's etchings. They unveiled the breadth of his fixation, tomes over 20 years, fine blood trees, bodily gauges, notes on temper and skill. He deemed Whispering Bayou a forge, its bound flock as trial vessels, all bent to his creeds on blood tears and human honing. But amid that etching, they found something unforeseen, signs of wit, endurance, and defiance among the very souls their sire had sought to shrink to marks. Bondsmen who schooled themselves in letters despite bans, women who'd wielded roots and old lore to curd their own fruiting, softly thwarting the colonel's mating scheme, men who'd marred tools and dragged yields in ways that seemed chance. Their sire had noted these flaws without spying them as sparks of revolt.
One name echoed oft in the later tomes, ever with scrawls of Delilah, their mother. The colonel had claimed her, awaiting a yielding bearer for his trial. Instead, he'd met a soul who defied him in faint, steadfast way, schooling her daughters in script when he strayed, murmuring to them of the world she'd known ere bonded, sowing doubts on his utter sway. She sought to shield us, Miriam said, tracing her digit over their mother's name, tally, even when she couldn't redeem herself. Then we owe her more than breath, Eliza replied. We owe her triumph, but triumph demanded wealth, seasons, and one more strand they lacked, a man they could command utterly, whose shade would meet the writ of their sire's testament while rending its ghost entirely. The balm came in late April, though they knew it not at once. The spring vending in Mossville drew hawkers and claimants from across mid-Louisiana, shifting the courthouse yard to a bazaar of human lament. Bound folks stood on a high dais, while pale men probed them like stock, gauging bite and sinew tone, pressing crude queries on toil past and vigor. The breeze bore dust and sweat and dread. Elijah and Miriam went with Fitch, fiending to claim added field arms for the widened acres they aimed to till. They donned sable veils, still in lament, which lent them shadow in the throng and let them gaze without being gazed too keen. The morn sails rolled as foreseen, toil hands to growers, house bonds to hamlet kin, young torn from sires and vended to sundry claimants. Then nigh midday, something queer rose on the vending block. Next batch, the caller boomed. Goods of the Beaumont holdings lately passed. One male, years roughly 28, name of Elijah, holds his letters, figures, served as house hand and mentor to the Beaumont young. No mark of uprising, no flights tried. Opening call, 1,000. Elijah stood on the dais with erect carriage and even gaze, neither bold nor bowed. He wore neat yet worn garb, and his hands, the palms of one who wrought with tallies, not cane, bore no scar. His hue was shades paler than most vended that morn, hinting mingled blood. But what snared Eliza's eye was something else wholly, the way he swept the throng, not with the crushed yield she awaited, but with reckoning, as if he weighed claimants as they weighed him. Schooled bonds apparel, one in the mass cried, breeds notions past his rank. Ideal for a hearth that craves tallies kept, the caller counted. How many of you balance your own ledges? Here's a soul who can wield it for you. Now, do I hear 1,000? The call stirred slow. Most growers shunned a schooled male bond, too ripe for strife, for scanning Yankee broadsheets, for
for faking passage slips. But some Hamlet traders stirred, spying worth in one who could steer their stores or pen letters.
Eliza leaned to Fitch. "Bid, Miss Eliza. We need no bid." Fitch lifted his palm. 1,000. 1,200, echoed a trader from Natchez. 1,300. Fitch hailed. The calls rose to 1,600 ere the Natchez trader yielded, shaking his crown at the bloated toll for one mail bond, schooled or nay. Eliza had paid beyond worth, a deed that would feed whispers in the weeks ahead. Elijah was fetched to Whispering Bayou 3 days on, treading the 8 miles from Mossville with his scant goods in a rag sack. Fitch met him at the plantation gate and guided him straight to the great house where Eliza and Miriam awaited in the sanctum. "You can scan and scribe?" Eliza said. It wasn't a query. "Yes, ma'am." Elijah's tone was school-guarded, bearing naught of his musings. "You mentored the Beaumont young. What lore did you impart? Script, scribing, sums, some maps and chronicles, whatever their sire bid." Miriam circled him slow, gauging. "The Beaumonts were famed abolition hearts. Friends, I reckon. They let their bonds be schooled." For the first time something flickered in Elijah's gaze, weariness perchance, or ken that this parley was deeper than it seemed. Mr. Beaumont held all souls bore spirits and wits worth blooming, ma'am. "And you?" Eliza queried. "What do you hold?" "I hold I'm before 2 women who overpaid me and who plainly harbor something precise in mind beyond field toil." The twins traded gazes. Their sire had schooled them to deem bound folk as things void of reckoning or lone thought. Elijah had shown both in 30 breaths. "We face a queer plight," Eliza said, wary. "Our sire passed lately, leaving bonds on our birthright that crave cunning bombs. We need one school, hushed and apt at grasping tangled pacts." "What manner of pacts?" "The sort that must linger veiled within this hearth," Miriam replied. "You'll dwell in the great house, not the huts. You'll graze our sire's shelves. You'll be handled fair, fed true, granted liberties queer elsewhere. But in trade, you'll heed what we bid, when we bid it, sans doubt or pause." Elijah held hush for a long breath. When he spoke, his tone was hushed deep. "And if I shun these unnamed bonds, then you'll be vended south," Eliza said flat. "To cane spreads in Mississippi, where schooled bonds are toiled to ending in the fields, to shatter them of any sage heirs. I can ship you in a week." It wasn't idle menace, and Elijah plainly knew. "What do you seek from me?" "That hinges," Miriam said. "Can you guard whispers, even ones that could serve as blades?" "I've guarded whispers my whole span, ma'am. Had to endure." Eliza strode to the pane, gazing out across the plantation soils. "Our sire's testament bids us wed within 24 moons or forfeit all. But we aim not to yield to unions wrought by men who deem us chattel to be steered. So we're going to thwart the bonds while strictly meeting them." "I grasp not." "You will," Miriam said. "But first, we need to ken if you can be trusted utterly and wholly." Over the ensuing days, Eliza and Miriam tried Elijah in ways both faint and bold. They lent him graze to their sire's shelves and watched what he grazed. They queried his views on state matters and hearkened for hints of Yankee leanings. They marked how he mingled with the other bound folk at Whispering Bayou, whether he sought to rally or stir.
Elijah proved deeply yielding. He kept lone, spoke guarded, and showed a wit clearly sharpened through years of treading peril grounds. He grasped that schooled bonds dwelt in frail stance, worth enough to hold, threat enough to dread. What the twins knew not, could not yet, was that Elijah
Elijah bore his own whispers and his own scheme. The Beaumonts had truly been friends with Yankee Benz. More, they'd woven an unwritten net that gathered oaths from bound folk on the truths of plantation breath. Elijah had spent 5 years etching woes, noting names and dawns and grains in a veiled shorthand he'd wrought. When the Beaumonts cast, both in a week from fever, their kin had vended the holdings. Elijah withal, ere any could unearth the chest hid in the root vault, holding years of guarded proof. Elijah had snatched his key scrolls ere the vending, veiling them in a gutted scripture that no pale soul troubled to probe. He'd been claimed and hauled to Whispering Bayou, awaiting another span of wary watch and etching. Instead, he found himself at the core of something far queerer and likely more dire. By mid-May, the pact had cleared. Elijah would stand as the twins' veiled scribe, steering hearth tallies and missives. But more, he'd be their confessor in a plot they hadn't yet fully bared. Elijah unveiled their scheme one eve in early June, after the house bonds had withdrawn to their huts, and the three lingered lone in the sanctum. "Our sire's testament bids us wed and bear young within 24 moons," she began. "The stewards must bless our pick of mates, men of fitting virtue and rank. But the testament speaks not of the mates being fitting for us, only that they match outer marks." "I'm not trailing," Elijah said. Miriam smiled, and there lurked something near wild in it. "We're going to bind men we can command wholly, aged men or ailing ones, or men starved enough for the tie to a rich plantation that they'll yield to any bonds. Men who will lend us writ legitimacy sans meddling in how we steer Whispering Bayou." "And the young?" Elijah queried, though he began to grasp. "Flesh is flesh," Elijah said stark. "Our sire spent 20 years proving that blood can be shrewdly steered. The stewards need to witness unions and swellings. They need not witness what transpires behind bolted doors." The full weight struck Elijah like chill stream. They sought him to sire their young, to forge the guise of rightful heirs while the twins held sway through unions that dwelt only on parchment. "You're bidding me wreak a deed that could end us all," he said slow. "If any unearth—" "No one will unearth," Miriam cut in. "We command this hearth utterly. The unions will be wrought wary. We'll steer every grain, every witness, every shred of proof. You'll be shielded." "Shielded?" Elijah laughed bitter. "I'm bound. There's no shield for me. If this breaks, you'll be shamed in society, perchance exiled somewhere. I'll be strong or torched alive." "Which is why you'll be driven to assure it holds," Elijah said. "And in trade, you'll gain something worth the peril." "What could weigh freedom?" Miriam said hushed. "Etched lawful freedom and coin enough to flee north and forge fresh breath. We'll bide until after the young are birthed and the holdings secure. Then we'll loose you, yield funds, and dispatch you with a veil tale that withstands gaze." Elijah gazed betwixt hunting deceit or false vows. "And if I shun, you won't," Elijah said with sureness, "because you crave freedom more than dread end, and you're keen enough to spy this as your sole true chance." She was true, he knew, but there lurked something else. Elijah saw in their plot not just a path to lone freedom, but a chance to etch and bear the whole web. If he could gather proof on the Hawthorne kin's whispers, on the colonel's trials, on the web of growers and taskmasters who'd aided in score years of woes, he could dispatch that lore north and strike a wound against the yoke that had stolen breath. "I'll wreak it," he said at last, "on one bond." "You're not placed to forge bond," Miriam said. "I am. If you crave my aid rather than my grudging yield, I want to ken all your sire's tome, his missive, his mating log, the lot. If I'm staking my breath for this plot, I merit the full veil." The twins weighed this. Granting Elijah Elijah free graze to their sire's parchments was peril, but shunning might breed exact the grudging yield he'd name. Agree, Eliza said, but you'll pour them here in this chamber under our watch. Naught leaves this house acceptable. What none voiced was that they'd each just struck a pact with one they trusted not wholly, staking their dawns on a ruse so bold it could thrive only if every thread aligned flawless. And in Willow Parish, Louisiana in 1847, flawless was scant indeed, like candlelight failing against the encroaching dark. The summer moons bore stifling heat to Whispering Bayou, the sort that thickened air to molasses and turned every flesh toil to torment. But within the great house, behind barred shutters and veiled drapes, a differing strain swelled. Eliza and Miriam began their hunt for fitting mates with the chill reckoning their sire had instilled. They needed men who met the steward's marks for virtue and rank, while frail enough to bend. They etched a roll from Hargrove's hints and their own gazes on Willow Parish society. The first seeker was Mr. Beauregard Varney, a 68-year-old bereft, whose cane spread had faltered since his sons strayed west to hunt fates in Arkansas. Varney had been a comrade of the colonel's and voiced swift zeal when neared on a potential tie with one of the twins, a blessed chance, he vowed, during his first call to Whispering Bayou in July, his roomy gaze wandering over Miriam with a look that chilled her flesh. Merge of too fine soil, sustenance of your sire's shade, I'd be graced to lead you through the tangles of plantation steering. Miriam smiled and voiced not. After Varney departed, she scoured her palms raw in the basin, as if to erase the echo of his touch on her limb during the grounds tour. He'll serve, Eliza said, healer cool. He's starved to mend his name after last year's ruined yield. He'll yield to any pre-wed bonds to claim the tie. I can't, Miriam breathed. Eliza, I can't let him graze me. He won't. That's the core. The union is writ fiction. Elijah sires the babe, Varney claims credit, and we hold sway. But forging two such union proved deeper than foreseen. The stewards, chiefly Whittaker, held firm views on fitting tie. When Eliza hinted she might bind a trader from Baton Rouge, a man of 42 with fair luck in the cane trade, Whittaker shunned him at once. Unfit roots, he vowed. Your sire meant you to bind into rooted grower kin, not trade ranks. The man's grandsire was a bound servant for mercy's sake. The twins pressed back, claiming the testament's words named no grower kin, only men of fitting virtue and rank. But Whittaker stood iron, vowing to beg the courts to clear the testament's heart if they pressed unfit seekers.
He's forcing us into unions that aid him, Eliza seethed after one fierce parley. He has sons. He's likely scheming to bind one of us to his own blood. While the union parleys dragged, Elijah sank into Colonel Hawthorne's parchments. What he unearthed there outstripped his darkest dreads. The colonel's mating scheme had wrought for 20 years with ordered cruelty. He'd driven precise pairings, vended babes who met not his marks, and split kin sans heed for flesh ties. He etched all in healer tongue that stripped folk to bare marks. Female 7 shows defiance to mating bids. Counsel heightened lash and seclusion to breed yield. But the tomes also held something more, proof of a web. The colonel wrought not lone. He penned with other growers, with healers' kin, with sages at southern academies. They traded trial fruits, weighed ways, and mused paths to push their creeds on blood tears and human honing. Elijah began etching wary copies of the grimmest marks,
Using parchment Eliza yielded for hearth tallies, and scribe in deep night when the twins had withdrawn. He wrought a way to veil his copied leaves in a gutted wedge of his palette, forging a hidden hoard that would one day trek north. But he also began to mark something the twins named not, the rhythm of woe among whispering bayous bound flock. In late July, 3 women in the huts bloomed signs: sores, fever, creeping frailty. Fitch noted it bland, hinting they be shut and given scant heed till they mended or passed. But Elijah had scanned the colonel's veiled healer notes and knew what he beheld: pox. The colonel had tainted sundry women, either willed as part of his probe or through his ordered flesh abuse. Now the woe crept through the huts, passed betwixt pairs, handed from mothers to babes. Elijah bore his finds to Eliza and Miriam one eve, laying out the healer tomes he'd unearthed with their sire's scrolls. Your sire gave 'em pox. Either he took it himself and spread it, or he bared them willed. The tomes hint both, and its end in them. Miriam's visage blanched. How many? At least 7 blooming signs now, but pox can linger hushed for years. No path to ken how many tainted sans true healer probe, and even then he faded. The vein clear, Eliza rose sharp and strode to the pane, her spine stiff. Can it be mended? Quicksilver cures at times, but they're near as dire as the woe itself, and costly, and would crave a healer willing to mend bound folk true, which Elijah needed not end that phrase either. Wreak it anyhow, Eliza said, sans turning. Claim whatever balms needed from Baton Rouge, have doctor ride out, and if he shuns to mend 'em fair, unearth one who will. Miss Eliza, the toll, I heed not the toll. Our sire wrought this, we're not going to let him fade from his rot. It was the first rift in the mask Elijah had spied, the first hint that the twins might be stirred by something past self-garden. He tucked it as key lore. Dr. Blackwood reached 2 days on, vexed at being hailed to mend bonds. He probed the ailing women with scarce veiled scorn, affirmed the verdict, and decreed quicksilver cures with the blithe certainty of one who cared not if the soul endured. Path of cure spans moons, he said, scouring his palms in the basin the house barn yielded. Can't vow fruits. Frankly, might be more frugal to just shut 'em and let fate reap, replace with hail stock. We'll take your decree, Miriam said chill, and we'll need you to probe the whole bound flock. All. Identify all lurking woes. Blackwood's brows rose. That's 40+ souls. The toll is ours to bear. When can you commence? The probes unfolded over 3 days in August. Wrought in a hut Fitch cleared for the deed. Blackwood toiled with gear efficiency, etching signs in a tally, and yielding verdicts with the hearthside manner of a beast gauger.
The end count was grimmer than Eliza had dreaded. 14 affirmed woes, another 8 likely. Nigh a third of Whispering Bayou's bound flock had been tainted by the colonel's ordered abuse. Eliza and Miriam drank this lore in hush. Then Eliza wrought a choice that would have stunned their sire and baffled their neighbors. We're mending all of them, she proclaimed. Claimed the quicksilver, the wraps, whatever's craved. Bettered shares for the ailing. They need strength to endure the cure. Curbed toil quotas, and Eliza, you'll steer the cures. Keep fine etchings of who takes what and their stride. Miss Eliza, Fitch balked, this will toll thousands and curb yields deep. Your sire would never. Our sire wrought this on them, Miriam cut in. We're mending his scar. The toll matters not. What the twins voiced, not even to each other, was the tangled drive behind their choice, partly shrewd, as dead bonds couldn't toil, and the plantation's worth hinged on its toll.
toil force, partly shame, kenning their hand in their sire's web, even as his prey, but partly something else, something neither dared probe too deep, the ken that their sire's deepest sin wasn't the precise woes he'd wrought, but the core creed that other folk dwelt only as tools for his ends. They'd been reared to muse the same. Now, faced with the flesh toll of that creed, they were driven to pick what souls they would bloom. Elijah watched these shifts with swelling bewilder. He'd awaited to unearth fiends at Whispering Bayou, folk who deemed him less than flesh. Instead, he'd unearthed two women wrought twisted by their sire's abuse, who now wrestled to untangle their own flesh from the venom he'd fed. It made them not allies, it meant not he trusted them, but it tangled his plain tale of tyrant and trodden in ways that made his etching harder. While Elijah wrestled moral tangles, the Union parleys hit a breaking. In September, Whitaker reached Whispering Bayou with a bid. His kinsman, Beaumont Whitaker, aged 34, lately back from New Orleans, where his cane brokerage had crumbled due to what was softly termed ill wagers, Beaumont craved fresh dawn and a rich tie. Eliza craved a mate the stewards would bless. Flawless tie, Whitaker proclaimed, having deemed the matter sealed. Beaumont has pure blood, grasps plantation steering, and will yield the firm male lead you crave. Eliza met Beaumont twice ere her verdict. He was frail, vain, and deep in debt, which made him ideal for her ends. I'll yield to the tie, she told Whitaker, under precise bonds, a pre-wed pact granting me lone steering of Whispering Bayou. Beaumont gains yearly coin, but no voice in plantation deeds, and the union holds not till my sister's tie is also wrought. Those bonds are deeply queer. Those bonds are unyielding. Beaumont is starved enough to yield. We both can. Whitaker sputtered, but couldn't contest the gauge. Beaumont did yield, etching a pre-wed pact that essentially wrought him a paid shade in trade for name and release from his lenders. Miriam's tie proved harder. Beauregard Varney had grown weary and turned his gaze to a bereft Natchez. The stewards shunned 3 other seekers for sundry causes. Time dwindled. They had till February 1849, and it was already October 1847. Then Miriam wrought a hint that shifted all. What if I bind not at all? Eliza gazed up from the tallies they'd been scanning. The testament bids us both to bind. The testament bids us both to bind within 24 moons. It speaks not of staying bound. I could bind, swell, and then mishaps befall, chiefly to ailing mates.
The chamber sank hush. Elijah, perched at the board where he'd been copying misses, felt chill water course his spine. "You're hinting slaughter," he said, hushed. "I'm hinting that we meet the writ of Sire's testament through whatever paths needed," Miriam replied. "He never decreed the mates had to endure." "Miriam," Elijah began, "don't feign you haven't mused it. Beaumont Whitaker will be strife. He's frail, but not dull. Once you're bound, he'll seek to claim sway, swelling or nay. Men like that ever do. They can't halt themselves." Eliza contested not, which was answer ample. Elijah grasped in that breath that he'd sorely misgauged. He deemed the twins prey of their lots, caged women seeking flight from their sire's grip through starved means. But they were their sire's daughters in ways deeper than blood. They'd learned to deem folk as barriers to be steered or culled. "If you're scheming to end anyone," he said wary, "I want no hand in it. That's not what I yielded to." "You yielded to heed what we bid," Miriam called, "and you'll keep heeding because the else is being vended south. Recall? Then vend me south. I won't aid slaughter." The twins traded gazes. Eliza spoke first, her tone softer. Miriam's musing in shade. "We're not scheming to end anyone, but she's true that we must weigh all paths. This plight is deeper than we foresaw." Elijah believed her not.
not, but he also knew he held no fair paths. If he shunned aid, they could indeed vend him away, and his etching would vanish. If he bared their schemes to law, he'd be shunned, a bond's word against pale women's, and likely ended for daring claims. So he did what bound folk ever did. He nodded, yielded, and began scheming how to shield himself when the fated fury came. November bore the first frost, and a fresh shift. Eliza's binding to Beaumont Whitaker was set for December 15th. The rite would unfold at Whispering Bayou, with Reverend Caldwell leading. Miriam would stand as handmaid. The stewards would grace to witness the meeting of the first bond. But behind the binding rites, bleaker schemes took form. Eliza and Elijah began their flesh ties in early November, healer encounters that unfolded in the bolted sanctum after Miriam withdrew. Elijah neared it with the same chill skill she bent to plantation steering. This was birthing, not closeness, a flesh duty craved to reap a goal. Elijah found it deeply stirring, not for the blood taboo they rent, though that peril loomed over every tie, but for the soul void of it, the way Elijah could part flesh deeds from flesh bond, so holy. My sire wrought this to scores of women, she said one night after, as they lay apart on the sanctum floor, drove them into precisely this plight, and I vowed I'd never be as him, yet here I dwell. You're not driving me, Elijah said, though it wasn't wholly true. The menace of vending south loomed over all. Aren't I? You're bound by mark. You can't yield. I tell myself this differs because I offer you release, because we're comrades in this ruse. But we're not comrades. I claim you. There's no yield possible in that we. It was the truest thing she'd voiced to him, and it worsened all, because she grasped precisely what she wrought, and wrought it anyhow. By mid-November, Eliza swelled. Dr. Blackwood affirmed it during a call to gauged pox cures. The stewards were gladdened. One bond met, one more to reap.
Beaumont Whitaker, who'd reached Whispering Bayou 2 weeks prior to gird for the binding, took the tidings with the blind glee of a man who held his own strength explained all. Miriam's plight lingered unresolved. She'd shunned 6 potential mates, vexing the stewards and running the calendar dire close to the end. Then, in early December, she proclaimed, "I've unearthed one fair, Mr. Gideon Morrow, bereft, age 51, with a scant plantation in Claiborne Parish, mild wealth, respectable name, no young from his first binding. I'll need to meet him," Whitaker said. "Of course, he'll call next week." Gideon Morrow reached on December 8th, a lean, fretful man with graying locks and a lingering hack that hinted wasting. He voiced little, yielded to Miriam ever, and seemed wretchedly thankful for her heed. "He's flawless," Miriam told Elijah after Morrow had gone. "Fading slow, starved for fellowship, and too frail to claim any sway. The stewards will bless him because he meets their skin marks, and he'll be gone within a year, leaving me a bereft free to wield as I will." "You're going to let him fade of wasting? I'm going to let fate reap. Is that slaughter, Elijah? Binding a sick man, kenning he won't endure?" Elijah had no reply that didn't ring like soul evasion. Eliza's binding unfolded on a chill, clear December dawn. 40 guests graced, filling Whispering Bayou's salon with the scent of ottar and wood haze from the hearths. Reverend Caldwell wrought the rite with his usual weighty gravity. Beaumont Whitaker looked pleased with his lot, plainly holding he'd claimed a prized boon. Eliza wore a gown of bone silk that Miriam had stitched, and her mask through the rite was as void as a china figure's. Elijah watched from the chamber's rear, feigning as added hearth hand for the rite. He saw Eliza voice her vows sans pause, saw her take Beaumont's graze with flawless poise, saw her smile and take lauds from guests who knew not what what manner of play they beheld. That night, after the guests had strayed, and Beaumont had drunk himself to stupor in his fresh quarters, Eliza came to the sanctum where Elijah bided. "It's wrought," she said, plain. "The first bond is met, and Beaumont will heed as bidden. I made that clear during our binding night parley. He gains a soft breath, yearly coin, and the guise of sway. In trade, he stays from my path, and queries not how this plantation rolls. He yielded to that. He yielded to shun being bared as a fraud, who thieved from his trade-kin in New Orleans. I claimed his aid with menaces, Elijah, the same way I claimed yours. I'm my sire's daughter, recall." The bitterness in her tone was fresh, and Elijah knew it as peril. Elijah was beginning to loathe herself for what she bloomed, which meant she might wreak something unforeseen to prove she differed from her sire, or something dire to prove she heeded not. Miriam's binding was set for January 20th, 1848. The stewards blessed Gideon Morrow after scant probe. His roots held, his soil claims true, and his starved zeal to rebind blinded them to any lurking woes. But in the weeks betwixt the two bindings, something shifted at Whispering Bayou. The hearth staff began hissing of clashes betwixt the twins, lifted tones behind bolted panels. Fitch noted that both women seemed scattered, making choices on plantation steering and then undoing them breaths later.
Eliza knew what unfolded, the strain of holding their ruse, woven with Eliza's swelling self-loathe, and Miriam's deepening chill reckoning was cracking their once bound front. It peaked the eve before Miriam's binding. Elijah was in the sanctum, toiling on his veiled etching, when he heard cries from above. He rushed up to find Eliza and Miriam in Eliza's chamber. Miriam with blood trickling from her nose, Eliza with claw marks on her visage. "She seeks to end him," Eliza cried when she spied Elijah. "Not just let him fade, truly toxin him. He's fading anyhow," Miriam shrieked back. "Why bide? Why risk him shifting his mind on the binding bonds? We tanked him with arsenic. He's gone in 6 moons. I'm a bereft and swollen, and we're free of all this, 'cause that makes us slayers, true-willed slayers. We're already slayers, or had you forgotten the coffee you fetched sire the eve he passed?" The chamber sank mute. Elijah gazed at the twins, ken flooding him with sick clarity. "You ended your sire," he said. Eliza sank onto the bed, her visage in her palms. Arsenic blended with ground glass in his coffee. Small measures over 3 weeks made it seem heart yield. Dr. Blackwood never doubted, because he craved to hold it natural ends. "He had to," Miriam said, her tone bold. "He aimed to vend Elijah and 3 other bonds to a dealer from Mississippi. We overheard him forging pacts, and he schemed to drive us into bindings with men he'd picked, men who would have aided him sustain his mating scheme. We lacked choice." "There's ever choice," Elijah said, hushed. "Easy for you to voice," Miriam barked. "You're caged in a snare built by a man who deemed you a flesh trial. I'm caged too, just differ in kind, and I've never ended anyone to flee it." The clash might have pressed, but they heard steps on the stairs, Beaumont stumbling drunk toward his wife's chamber. The 3 plotters fell mute, hearkening to him curse as he fumbled the latch, then yield and shuffle off. After he'd gone, Eliza voiced hushed. "We can't wreak this again, Miriam. If you toxin Gideon, it's ended. Someone will mark, someone will probe, and all of this, the plantation, our release, Elijah's etching, all of it will crumble. Then what do you hint? We're dwindling time. We bide. We let fate wreak with Gideon. We bear. And when it's at last ended, when we've met sire's bonds and claimed the birthright, then we pick who we crave to be." Miriam answered not at once.
When she did, her tone was weary. I cannot if I can bear more. I cannot if there's aught left of me to redeem. Elijah, watching them, grasped he'd been etching the wrong tale. He'd fixed on the colonel's woes, the ordered abuse, the mating scheme. But the true dread of Whispering Bayou wasn't what had been wrought to bound folk, though that was dread amble. It was what had been wrought to the twins themselves. The way their sire had twisted them into blades and then aimed them at each other. They were prey and reekers as one, caged in roles they hadn't picked, but now playing with swelling despair. And Elijah was caged with them. His own endurance hinged on a plot that seemed more apt every dawn to end in ruinous fury. Miriam's binding to Gideon Morrow unfolded on January 20th, 1848, a smaller rite with only 20 guests. Morrow looked bone thin, his hack worsening in the January chill. He craved his prop to tread to the salon where Reverend Caldwell bided. The rite spanned 12 minutes. When Caldwell deemed them bound, Morrow sought to graze his bride, but was gripped by a hacking fit that left blood on his cloth. Waston's gripped him deep, Dr. Blackwood hissed to Whitaker. Give him 6 moons, maybe less.
Gideon Morrow shifted into Whispering Bayou that eve, taking a chamber far from Miriam's. He seemed wretchedly thankful for every faint grace, thanking hands off for fetching water and tending his blaze. Miriam and Elijah began their encounters in early February. Unlike Eliza's bitter truth, Miriam deemed it another trade to be wrought swift. She set precise hours, and after departed sans word. By March, Miriam swell. Gideon Morrow, shut to his palate by deepening woe, took the tidings with muddled glee. Praise be, he rasped, you'll have something to recall me by. The stewards called in April to affirm both swellings. They found all in order, both twins bound, both swelling, cane yield held. Whitaker deemed himself sated. Meanwhile, Elijah spent his nights etching all. He now held proof of the colonel's mating scheme, the pox spread, the toxin, and the binding plot. But he still couldn't scheme how to send the writs north, sans being snared. In May, a wandering preacher named Abel Thorne reached claiming to gather mission alms. During supper, Thorne named dwelling in Philadelphia. Elijah caught the weight, a famed Yankee hub. He wrought a small palm sign, a mark used by hidden path runners. Thorne halted mid-word, his gaze flicking to Elijah, then pressed on, sans skip. Later, Elijah neared him by the stall. I hold writs, proof of sins. It craves to reach Philadelphia. After musing, Thorne yielded. Elijah spent 10 days etching his key etching onto thin leaf, scribing in tiny hand. He etched the colonel's trials, the driven mating, the pox spread, the toxin, and his own hand in the twins' plot. He called on Josiah, a field hand, to fetch the writs to Thorne in Vidalia. 2 weeks on, Josiah returned, affirming fetch. Elijah felt at once freed and dreaded, but the proof now dwelt beyond the twins' grip. But if unearthed, he was ended. Summer bore mounting strain. Eliza's swelling strode fair, though she grew deeper withdrawn. Beaumont Whitaker took to heavy drink. Gideon Morrow lingered in his sick chamber, tended by enduring hands. Then Eliza began calling on Gideon, bearing him volumes.
He'd been a teacher once, he breathed, ere claiming a plantation he'd never learned to steer true. I'm just a loreman who craved to graze tomes, he said. Is that so dire? Eliza had no reply. On August 17, 1848, Gideon Morrow passed in his slumber from wasting. He was entombed 3 days on, his brief shade marked with a plain stone. Gideon Morrow, 1797, 1848. He found repose at the close. Miriam was now a swollen bereft. The testament's bonds met, but something shifted in her after Gideon's end. Shame, even though she hadn't willed his end. In mid-September, a woman emerged claiming to be the colonel's half-kin, menacing suits if not yielded a share. The twins knew she was false, but ere they could reek, she neared Fitch with a bribe bid. Fitch bared it swift. Armed with this proof, the twins faced the false and her counsel in Mossville. The parley was brief and brutal. They fled Louisiana within a day, but the clash bared their frailty. Until the babes were birthed, they lingered marks. In late October, all nigh unraveled, Beaumont Whitaker, drunk after card games, named that Eliza had swelled within weeks of their binding. Queer, swift timing. Word crept through Willow Parish in days. The shame struck Whispering Bayou like thunder. Whitaker reached, demanding truths. Eliza wrought a choice. She stood before key neighbors, 7 moons swelling, and yielded a reckoned confession. I was rent, she said steady. Before our binding, Beaumont and I were close. We swelled. Rather than break the binding and face ruin, we pressed with the right. It was wrong. It was sin. But it voids not our sire's testament.
The men traded uneasy gazes. Pre-binding closeness was shame, but not unheard. Eliza's bold bearing made the tale whole, a falsehood that shielded the deeper ruse beneath. What of your sister? Whitaker queried. Miriam's plight is wholly fair. Whitaker gazed her deep, but held no proof to break her tale. This matter is sealed, he proclaimed at last. The testament's bonds are met. After all strayed, Eliza sank in the salon, her poise at last cracking. Eliza went into throes on November 14th, 1848. The throes spanned 18 hours. At dawn on November 15th, a babe's wail pierced the morn hush. A girl, the midwife proclaimed, small but hale. Eliza lay drained against the cushion, her daughter swaddled beside her. The babe had dark locks and vague marks, useful in a house wrought on falsehoods. She's free, Eliza breathed. That's all that weighs. Miriam birthed on December 7th, after 12 dire hours. Cord wrapped round the babe's neck. The midwife toiled with calm skill, till a faint wail affirmed endurance. Another girl, she said. She's a warrior. Miriam gazed at her daughter, darker than Eliza's babe, with Mark's craven, wary tale. I'm naming her Esther, after our mother, and mine will be Lydia, Eliza said through tears. After the grandmother we never knew. The names graced women their sire had erased. They were the first choices the twins had wrought that weren't reckoned for gain. Simply mothers naming their daughters. The stewards called on December 20th to affirm both births and seal the Holden's shift. Whitaker probed the babes healer-like, noted their being, and proclaimed the testament's bonds wholly met. Whispering Bayou Plantation is hereby yielded to Eliza Whitaker and Miriam Morrow. The holdings are sealed. After he strayed, Eliza felt naught, no victory, no ease, just drain. They'd triumphed, but the toll had been vast. Elijah entered bearing Lydia. She craves her mother. As Eliza took her daughter, she wrought a choice. We're holding our vow. Your loose papers will be etched next week. Funds ample to reach Philadelphia and root there. Elijah had awaited delay. delays, the directness snared him off guard. Just so, we wrought a pact, I'm honoring it, and the writs I sent north. Eliza's gaze narrowed. I ken of those. Fitch snares all missives. I ken what dwelt in them. All on sire schemes, the toxin, our pact. Then why shunned you? Because you were right to etch it. Someone craves to voice truth. Perchance your oath will reach folk who can shift things. Miriam emerged with Esther. We're not halting you, but we're begging 6 moons. Bide till June. Aid steady deed. Then stray with our grace and corn enough to bloom fresh. It was master bend, but also true. 6 moons, he yielded. The winter passed in fair repose. Pox cures pressed with sundry full mends. The twins rooted into motherhood while holding keen plantation deeds. Elijah spent eves girding for stray, but found himself loath to go. He bloomed ties to the young he had sighed, and tangled ken of the twins themselves. Prey, seeking flight from preyhood, striving to bloom better than they'd been reared. In March, a missive reached from Pennsylvania, etched to Elijah. It was from Abel Thorne. The oath had reached the Pennsylvania Anti-Bondage Guild. They were weaving it for a tale on Louisiana spreads. Sire's shade will be bearing and damnation, Eliza said, hushed. All he held will be used as proof of the web's rot. He was a fiend, Elijah said. I can, but he was also my sire.
They shifted Elijah's strayed mid-April. The eve before he went, Eliza hailed him to the sanctum. I've been musing on what we wrought, she said. We swayed ourselves, we differed from sire, because we yielded you release. But we differed not, we just used keener force. I can, and yet you bided the extra moons, ended the cure, met your pact even after you knew I unearthed your etching. Eliza passed him a pouch heavy with gold bits. This is more than we packed. There are also missives of lead to traders who won't query a loosed bond with fair writs. Why? Because Lydia and Esther will query their sire someday, crave to tell them he was a fair man who wrought hard picks, who etched truth when others craved it in tomb. Miriam emerged with both babes. We're bidding farewell true, as kin should. Elijah held his daughter's one last breath, etching their visages. Be fair, he breathed, be better than all of us. Elijah strayed whispering by you on April 18th, 1849. He bore his writs and a likeness Eliza had wrought in veil, him clasping both girls on the rear. Elijah and his daughters, April 18th, 1849. May they all unearth freedom. He reached Baton Rouge and claimed passage north. The vessel strayed April 23rd. He never returned to Louisiana, but his oath did. The Pennsylvania Anti-Bondage Guild issued their tale in July 1849, etching spread woes and naming Colonel Ezekiel Hawthorne plain. It stirred rage in northern realms and fury in southern ones. In August, Thaddeus Whitaker began querying how Whispering Bayou lore had reached Pennsylvania. On September 3rd, he reached with a lawman and writ to probe for signs of Yankee deeds. Elijah was loosed, Eliza replied, calm. He strayed with our grace. Whatever he wrought after is his deed. He thieved goods, your sire's tombs. My sire's tombs passed to us. We lent Elijah grays as part of his chores. What he wrought with that grays is musing. Probe spanned 3 hours. They unearthed naught. Whitaker was driven to stray empty-palmed, though his parting words bore menace. This isn't ended. Someday, someone will unearth the truth. After he strayed, Miriam said, we need to fade. It took 6 weeks. They vended Whispering Bayou for swift coin, loosed sundry key folk with funds to root themselves, and vended the lingering flock to a friend trader who'd vowed
hauled to free realms. Beaumont took his soil and coin share for yield and never to contest the vending. On October 14th, 1849, Eliza and Miriam boarded a vessel in Baton Rouge, bound for New Orleans, straying as berefts with babe daughters. But before straying Louisiana, they made one last halt. On October 15th, a blaze stirred in the Mossville courthouse cellar. The edifice burned for 6 hours, crumbling ere dawn. 3 husks were unearthed, deemed wanderers seeking shade, though none gazed deep at why they'd been shackled in the cellar. The probe deemed a toppled lantern wrought the chance blaze. Most parish ledgers from 1847 to 1849 crumbled. Any seeking to trace Whispering Bayou's lore would unearth only shards and voids. Eliza and Miriam reached Illinois in December 1849. They claimed a scant farm outside Springfield, using false names, showing as bereft sisters blooming anew. Their daughters bloomed kenning only that their mothers had strayed from Louisiana, had fled dire lots, and that their sire had been a fair man who'd wrought yields.
Elijah rooted in Philadelphia as a tally keeper. He never bound, never sired other young, never voiced openly on Louisiana, but he pressed yielding oaths and aided fleeing bonds till the war between realms began. He kept the likeness veiled, drawing it out at times to gaze at his daughters' visages. In 1863, a Union scout unearthed a sealed chest in Whispering Bayou's ruins, holding tomes and mating logs that affirmed all in the tale and added fresh dreads. The writs became part of the plea for why bondage craved utter end. Colonel Ezekiel Hawthorne's shade became precisely what his daughters foretold: barren, damnation, proof of ordered ill. But the full truth on Eliza and Miriam, on Elijah and the young, lingered veiled in burned ledgers and shrewdly wrought falsehoods. The courthouse blaze was never unraveled, the husks never named, the writs never reclaimed, and the truth on the Louisiana twin sisters who shared one male bond betwixt them till they both swelled, lingered entombed in ash and hush for over a century. Some chroniclers claim the tale is forged, that no ledgers dwell to uphold the claimed deeds. Others point to the Pennsylvania Anti-Bondage Guild's tale and claim that where there's etching, there's truth. But perchance it weighs not if every grain is provable. What weighs is what the tale bears on the web that made such deeds not only possible, but nigh fated. A web built on demon flesh folk as chattel, on wielding fury and ruse as tools of sway. The Hawthorne twins, if they dwelt, were both prey and reekers. Elijah, if he breathed, was both aider and defiance warrior. The young claimed a shade of wound and endurance, shame and strength, and the rest of us claimed the duty to recall, to probe, and to assure that the lots that wrought such dreads never dwell again. What do you muse on this tale? Do you hold all was bared, or are there still whispers entombed in those burned ledgers? Drop your word below with your musings on what truly befell at Whispering Bayou Plantation. If you savored this lament and crave more gloom enigmas from forsaken American lore, bind to forgotten liturgy, tap that warning chime, and share this vision with one who honors the stirring truths veiled in our past. The next tale might be deeper unsettling than this. Until then, recall that lore's gloomiest verses are oft the ones folks strove hardest to erase.